Hey guys, Colton Richardson here, Colton the lawyer. And sorry I've been absent for a little bit. I had a bunch of things on the evenings and I worked during the day, so wasn't able to make any videos, but I've been keeping up some on the Alex Murdaugh trial. And crazy stuff happened today. They actually had to evacuate the building, the courthouse, for a bomb threat, which is crazy. That normally doesn't happen. But let's jump right in and catch up on some of what's going on. And so I skipped the cross of the first witness, and let's watch the state's 39th witness or something like that. So let's start it up.
We'll have a seat on the witness stand. My name is Annette Griswold, Griswold.
Ms. Griswold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Good. If you would just tell the jury a little bit about yourself.
And this is a former paralegal of Alex Murdaugh.
Where you grew up and what you do for a living, please.
Okay. I grew up in Hampton, South Carolina, and lived there for the first 18 years of my life. Graduated from Wade Hampton High School, went away for college at 18, ended up falling in love with the Charlotte, North Carolina area.
Uh-oh.
Over the next 2 decades, I spent most of that time in Charlotte. That's where I got married. And with the exception of a few years coming back to Hampton and a few years in Columbia for my husband to get his degree, that time was spent in Charlotte until 2012. My dad took ill and he wanted us to move closer to be near him, and my mom needed help taking care of him. So I moved home in 2012 after my father passed away. A few months after, I went back on the job search, and I'd been out of work for 2 months helping my mom. So I was looking for a job and ran into my friend's father, and he told me I should probably check the law firm. I found out that I had a school friend that worked there, so I reached out to her, sent her my resume, and she forwarded it to the right people. And 3 interviews later, I was working for the firm, and I worked as a paralegal and was hired to work for Alex Murdaugh.
Which firm are we talking about?
What everybody refers to as PMPED.
Okay. And when did you start working there?
July of 2012.
And when you started working there, who were you working for?
Alex Murdaugh.
And the entirety of the time that you were there up until the time that he was no longer a partner in that firm, is that who you worked for?
That's correct.
So how long was that?
That was a little over 9 years.
So this is where Alex
Were you the only staff member that he had that was assigned to him?
No, we have, there's 2 of us that worked for Alex. I've been with him, like I said, the 9 years. And then the other secretary was Christy Gerald, and she had been with him about almost double of what I'd been there.
Quickly describe for me sort of the division of labor between you and Christy Gerald, please.
I was hired to handle more of the larger cases that Alex had.
She worked
where
close
it's
with
litigation law, and so it's personal injury for the most part, workers' comp, medical malpractice, premises liability, product liability, wrongful death, trucking cases. And so he wanted me to take over those bigger cases and handle those. And then Christy did more of the day-to-day stuff and the smaller files. Still just as important, but just smaller files than the larger ones.
You had the more complex stuff?
I did.
The bigger cases?
Yes, sir.
Just quickly, how was the defendant as a boss and a lawyer? Just what were his typical work habits, and what was he like in the office?
Interesting question. And what they probably did on here, what the prosecution probably did is prepped her and said, hey, we're going to ask you this type of question, and this is kind of the response that we're looking for. So be ready for it. And that's definitely one of those questions that he'd kind of prep her on, especially to get the ball testimony rolling.
extremely intelligent when it comes to the law. I respected and admired that in him greatly. He didn't keep normal hours. He liked to float in later in the late morning time or early afternoon. We always had a running joke. We knew that he might not be there all day, but he would always show up right before 5 o'clock when we were ready to leave. So just, kept unset hours. Pretty, I sometimes referred to Alec as a Tasmanian devil, because when he walked in, no matter what you were doing, you were started spinning, because he was just coming through and, shouting everybody's name and ready to get work done when he was walking in the door. So it was kind of confusing.
Interesting.
Let me ask you just a little bit. The jury's heard some testimony about disbursement sheets and how they work. And can you just remind them very quickly how that works? Who prepares the disbursement sheets and how does that go about taking place?
After I find out that a case is settled, I go ahead and start getting my disbursement sheet ready, where I can kind of go ahead and expect what the deductions are that are going to come out of it. The attorney's fees, the expenses. Anytime you have Medicare or any health insurance, there's typically a lien on that money, and we are required by law to pay it back. So I go ahead and start looking into all that, draft the sheet, and get everything on it that I know that I'm aware of. And then it goes to Alec, and he makes any changes he needs to. And then once he signs off on it, I send it across to our accounts payable department, and they cut the checks.
So that's typical. I am actually a personal injury lawyer, and that's the type of case that she's talking about. So after you get the settlement, there's different disbursements. First, the attorney's fees, then any costs or expenses that the attorneys had usually come out. And like she said, there's liens. So medical providers file liens after they've treated someone, and those come out of the settlement. And so she described it exactly how it works. I don't know if it was necessarily relevant.
With what is generally referred to as the boat case?
I am.
And that is the boat wreck that occurred around February of 2019?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that the defendant was sued civilly in that particular case?
Yes, sir.
After the boat case happened, did you notice any change in the defendant's demeanor around the office and about his work habits?
I did. He was more distant. Even when he was in the office, he was absent. It was he's always been hard to sit still and get answers from, and to sign our documents and anything that we had put in his office to sign. But it got extremely worse after the boat accident. He was rarely there, and when he was, the door was closed, and it was almost impossible for us to reach him. He was always on his phone. He was always dealing with something bigger than what we had going on.
As time moved on into the early part of 2021, did that even get worse?
It did. He would come in lots of times, and he was just not his normal self, or what his normal self used to be. It was just very tense, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just, you could tell that it was the boat crash was weighing heavy on him, and it was consuming his life almost, it seemed like. And he was just harder to reach. And there was a couple instances where I referred to him as having his ass on his shoulders, because that's how I felt. It was disrespectful of me to feel that way and to say that out loud, but that's how I felt, because he just wasn't himself with us anymore. He came in, and it was just like yelled our names and just didn't treat us the same way he did prior to the boat accident.
That was a very long answer.
Was the defendant very protective about anyone going into his office?
He was. There was often times where he would come in on a Monday and say, "Who's been in my office?" And we'd be like, "I don't know, probably the cleaning ladies." We have no idea. He was, it was very cluttered, very unorganized.
So that's very interesting. That means he was being very protective of his space and who was in that space. He closed his door. He wanted a lot of privacy. So she's kind of describing his demeanor before and after this boating accident, and how it kind of shut off, how he became very private and as if he's hiding something. So that's very interesting testimony right here.
organized, but he said he knew where his stuff was, that it was organized in his way.
Jury's heard a lot of testimony about this, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask it this way. Over the years, in various cases, did the defendant ask you to put disbursements to forge on various disbursement sheets so that settlement checks would be prepared from the trust account made out that way?
Yes, sir, he did. I can't remember when it started, but he told me, to put it on Forge. And me knowing Forge Consulting was a legitimate company, I would, on the disbursement sheet, I would put Forge Consulting. And he would say, no, it's not Forge Consulting. If I wanted to be Forge Consulting, I would have told you Forge Consulting. I want it to be Forge. And I was like, well, I don't understand. Isn't the name of the company Forge Consulting? And he told me that he described it to me. He said, think of it like Forge Consulting is the large company and Forge is a kind of under that umbrella of it. So he said, Forge Consulting is the big name. And then you have all different things they do, including Forge, which is more like a savings account than a trust.
So he would actually get you to change it from Forge Consulting to just Forge.
Correct. Even when across the street at the accounts payable department, they would
Yes
write
no
the check out to Forge
question.
Consulting. Lots of times I would have to reach out to them and say, hey, you wrote this to Forge Consulting. He says it needs to be Forge. And so lots of times they would have to change that.
Those checks that he would have on disbursement sheets to get cut, made out to Forge, would he often talk to you about picking those up personally?
Yes, I would ask him if I could go ahead and mail it to Michael Gunn at Forge Consulting because he was our contact. And he would say, no, you know what? I'm seeing Gunn this weekend. He's coming out to the farm, or we're going to meet halfway tonight and have dinner. He always said that he was going to hand deliver it. So I even got to where I would make file notes in my files. Alec took check to hand deliver because I was so worried that he was going to lose these checks.
She's so
Because he was,
wordy.
a little aloof sometimes and, would leave keys in his vehicle, would misplace a few things. And so I was so worried that these checks were going to get lost and then we would have to do a stop payment and reissue the check. So I started making notes where I would remember that I didn't mail it, that it was actually hand delivered.
I would want her to shorten her answers because
Well, hand delivered, at least
probably
from
getting
who was
lost
telling
in
you
the-
it was going to be
That's
hand
correct.
delivered.
in the
Yes.
Who was
answers.
saying that?
Alec was.
All right, when you're talking about the defendant or Alec Murdaugh, do you see him here in the courtroom today?
I do.
Can you point him out to the jury, please?
Yes, he's over in it looks like a navy blue jacket.
So a lot of times in criminal proceedings, you have to identify who the defendant is. In this case, it's not that difficult. In some cases, it can be, especially when they're wearing a mask or something like that. But I haven't seen every single witness, but they might be doing it with quite a few witnesses. But this is a personal relationship that she has with Alex, and so it's easy connection to make right here.
Your Honor, can the record reflect she's identified the defendant? You mentioned he would say that, I'm going to see Gunn. I'm meeting him halfway. We're going hunting.
And a lot of times, especially during preliminary hearings, if they have preliminary hearings, and sometimes at trial, the defense will actually stipulate that they have identified the defendant.
Things like that. Tell the jury again, who's Michael Gunn?
Michael Gunn he's our contact. He's the person we talk to when it comes to trust annuities with Forge Consulting.
And that's the real Forge, correct?
That's correct.
Not the fake Forge.
Not the fake Forge.
Moving into the latter part of 2020, did you have any particular issue arise with a disbursement to Forge that caught your attention?
I did.
Tell me about that if you would, please.
I was currently working from home. I'd had surgery on Halloween of 2020, and I was working from home, hadn't come back yet. I was planned to come back to the office the following Monday. And on that day, I believe it was December 15th of 2020, I got a phone call from the accounts payable department. Nicole called me, and she's one of the ladies that cuts the checks and works for Jeannie Seckinger. And she told me that she had just got a disbursement sheet over, that Christy had sent over a disbursement sheet in one of my files. It made no sense. She didn't understand it. And I was confused too, because I was like, why didn't he contacted me to do my disbursement because I'm kind of protective over my files. If I've worked that file the whole time, I want to finish that file. I want to work the whole process of it. And actually, the disbursement part is my favorite part of the file because I want to be able to have that, be there when that client gets their money and gets that closure that they deserve.
That's probably the best part.
I thought it was very odd that Christy was drafting a disbursement in one of my files, and
this was the day you were off work.
That's correct. I was working from home, and I could have been reached, but I wasn't until Nicole reached out to me and told me.
Keep going.
Surprising that the defense isn't.
She told me. So I looked. She sends it to me by email or text. I can't remember, and I reviewed it, and it didn't make sense to me either. There was a line on it that said the attorney fees were going, or amount of it was going to Forge, and I didn't understand how that was happening. And I'd never seen him send attorney fees to Forge before, and so I didn't know that that was even a possibility. And so I called the office, and Christy transferred me to Alec, and I spoke to him and asked him about it. And he said, why did Nicole call you? And I said, well, she doesn't know how to write these checks out because it doesn't make sense to her. She hasn't ever seen a disbursement like this. And he said, I'll take care of it. And so he said, I'll call Nicole, I'll take care of it. And so I remember talking to Nicole later and say, so what did he say? What was the reason behind it? And she said, he said that they can structure their attorney fees, and that's what that check was for.
Did you have a subsequent discussion with the defendant about that?
I did, and he told me the same thing. He said it was something that they've been able to do forever. He just never took advantage of it before, and so now he decided that he was going to start structuring those attorney fees where it would make have interest drawn. And so it made sense, because why not? Why not, instead of having that money sit somewhere, put it somewhere where it's going to draw more money?
His explanation to you made sense.
Yes, it did.
On its face.
Yes.
Do you remember the name of that case?
That was the Hirschberger case.
I'm going to show you.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how this was relevant. Because if I was the defense, I would be objecting that it's not relevant. And as I mentioned before you show a witness a exhibit, usually you have to show the other side what it is, or
refer to it. What's already been admitted to evidence, the state's 429, and see if you recognize this document.
Yes, I do. This is the disbursement that was in December of 2020 that I was talking about.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Put it up on the screen.
And we'll see what questions he asks about it.
At that point in time, we're in December of 2020. Is that right?
That's correct.
After the defendant gave you that explanation that seemed valid to you on your face, did that matter just kind of go away at that point in time?
It did. It was kind of, always at the back of my mind, because I still felt like there should have been some kind of paper trail. But yeah, the explanation worked that he gave me. And so I was trying to just go along with it because I thought it was valid.
As we move on into January 2021, did another incident happen that came to your attention as related to disbursements?
Yes. The end of January, it was a Friday afternoon. I left early that day to take my mom to the eye doctor, and kind of the same scenario of kind of an exact repeat of December happened again. Nicole from Accounts Payable called me, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, I've got another one." And so Christy had drafted a disbursement in a case referred to as Moore. And she had sent it over. And once again, it had the same wording and kind of confusion that the Hirschberger one had a month previous. So she didn't really understand it again. She was still trying to say, I feel like we need more information on this. And I said, I do too. And so kind of the same scenarios before, I reached out to Alec, he reached out to Nicole, and ultimately the checks got written. But it was the same scenario. As you can see on here, the $91,867.50 was attorney fees that were structured that went straight to Forge.
Man,
to the
got some
fake,
long
what we now know
responses.
was the fake Forge.
Long
All right.
responsibility.
And is that still in the Hirschberger matter you're talking
That's the
about?
Hirschberger one. And on the Thomas More one,
We'll
it
get
was,
there in a second.
okay.
When you got that call, do you remember where you were, the second call?
yeah, the Thomas More, I was at the eye doctor with my mom.
All right, I'm still on Hirschberger. Do you remember where you were on that?
Oh,
second?
I was home. I'd had surgery and I was home recovering.
And I'm going to
The state's doing pretty good at questioning. He doesn't have to do much work, though, because he preps the witness exactly where he was going to go.
show you this, and we're still in the same exhibit, that being 429. Do you recognize that at all? Let me hand this exhibit to you. Probably easier that way.
So it's already been admitted
Just take a
and
photo of it, if you would, please.
I say
Absolutely.
published to the jury, which just means show the jury. I don't know why they say publish.
Yeah, this is what we refer to now as the second Hirschberger disbursement. It was on the UIM portion of the case and liability portion. So once again, the PMP attorney's fees were routed to Forge in the amount of $83,333.33.
It's a lot of money to route away from the firm. Dang, Alex.
All right, you had started to talk about Thomas More. Is that another incident that came to your attention as we're moving into early 2021?
Yes, sir. That one, like I said, was at the end of January. Once again, I was out of the office. I was at an eye doctor with my appointment with my mom. Got the call from Nicole. She said it's the same scenario. But this time it was all the funds that was in client's trust, which was $125,000, I believe, and all those funds were being routed. That was attorney fees and client money that was being routed to the fake Forge.
Geez.
And
And I see a few new people joined us. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have about this trial.
this was another one of your cases, is that right?
It was. So another situation where I'm out of the office. It's almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. Christy drafts the disbursement. Alex signs it. They send it over in my absence.
When these instances are happening that you're describing to the jury where you happen to be out of the office, these are your cases, right?
That's correct.
And all of a sudden you're getting communications that the defendant is having Christie draft some disbursements. In any of these cases, was there anything going on that something happened and had to be done that very day that you just happened to be out of the office?
I didn't think so because in particular, the Thomas More case, we were working on the third party portion of the case, but there was also a workers' comp portion that another attorney was working on. And when you're working on a workers' comp case, if you settle the third party first, you can't disperse it until the workers' comp portion is taken care of, because workers' comp always has a huge lien that you have to negotiate for the client.
You have to
So
pay
the
workers'
money
comp
was
back.
supposed to sit there. It was my understanding it would probably be sitting there another year until the workers' comp
welcome.
portion of the case was settled. So those funds
Welcome.
didn't need to go anywhere. So it was very odd that all of a sudden they're all sent to Forge because they were supposed to remain in the account, was my understanding.
Do you take pride in the work that you do on these complex cases?
I do.
Do you know your cases very well?
I'd say I do.
Those are interesting questions.
Was there any reason of which
Could've
you were
left those
aware
off.
that things had to be happening the day that they were?
I did. No, it definitely put up another yellow flag, and it made me think about the previous one that happened in Hirschberger in December.
Yellow flag.
Because both of them were kind of the same scenarios, me out of the office, someone else drafting it. And not that we can't work in each other's files, we can, but it's easy to miss something if it's not your file. If I had to go in somebody else's file and draft a disbursement, I may not know that there's a lien or a certain promised medical bill or anything else that needs to be paid. So
Which that is true. I work in a personal injury law firm. We do personal injury, and whenever you swap cases, there are things that you can miss. And so she's absolutely right in saying this.
that's why, to me, it's easier if somebody that's worked the case actually drafts the disbursement, because they know
True.
all the deductions that have to come out.
Very true.
Was the defendant using the opportunity of you being out of the office to push these things through?
Yes, in hindsight, it was easy to see that the chaos, the sending it over at, 10 minutes before 5 p.m. was kind of a way of part of that little hurricane, a
You're
little
right.
tornado portion, just sending it over when most people are gone, and
They all
it's
ganged
just
up
going
on
to get
him.
done quickly and no questions asked.
Apparently, he burned his bridges there.
You said that the Thomas More line was particularly unusual because it was workers' comp and those funds couldn't be dispersed yet, correct? To your understanding?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have a conversation with the defendant about why these funds were dispersed?
I did, and he explained to me that he had gotten permission that since the money was going to be sitting there another year, that they were going to send it to Forge and let it draw interest, and then that would be money that would draw interest on for the client as well as the firm, because it was both portions of the money.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted into evidence. It states 328. See if you recognize this document.
So an account like that, for example, in Oklahoma, we have what's called IOLTAs, IOLTA. I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but it is an account that you put money, a client's money in for it to earn interest, and the interest actually goes to the bar association. So no one actually gets it except the bar association, not the client or the lawyer.
Yes, this is the Thomas More disbursement that I'm referring to, that where the entire client trust amount of $125,000.
Do you recognize the signature down at the bottom of the page?
I do. Alex signed it where it says R. Alexander Murdaugh, and then where the client's signature is, that is not the client's signature. It's Alex's handwriting.
You recognize his handwriting from working for him for 9 years?
I do.
Snap. Whoops. There it is. Forge someone's signature. Dang. So they're bringing in financial crime, evidence of the financial crimes to kind of show his motive for murdering, which is interesting because they don't really have a solid motive.
Did the defendant have a case going on around this time involving Mack trucks?
He did. What we refer to as the Ferris case. We actually went to Columbia and had a bench trial in that case in January of 21.
And did you work on that case to some extent?
I did.
Was that one of the ones assigned to you?
Yes.
Was the defendant the only lawyer on that case, or were there other lawyers?
No, there was 2 co-counsels that had brought us in. Wayne Ridgway was the first attorney that received that case. He reached out to Chris Wilson's office, and Chris joined the case as well. And then Chris reached out to our firm, and so now there's a third attorney, which was Alec, involved in it.
Ultimately, was that case tried before a judge?
It was bench trial, like I said, in January of 2021.
And did the judge issue a verdict in favor of the firm's clients?
Did, yes, sir. And the next month, I think sometime in February, we got a very nice verdict for the clients.
Who was going to be dispersing the fees in that once the money came in? Was that going to be PMPED, or was it going to be the other attorney's
Chris
firm?
Wilson's office.
Had the firm PMPED, had it accrued costs in the course of that litigation?
Yes,
Expenses?
yes,
Let's
And
see
did
where
you
he's
prepare
going.
those and send those to Chris Wilson's office, or how did that work?
I did. I put the totals in an email and sent them to, Alec wanted me to send him the totals by email, and so that's what I did. And then I guess he sent them to Chris after that.
All right.
And so that's how lawyers structure their questioning. Is they start with kind of like the punchline. This at the end, they have the punchline at the end, or the last question for a certain topic, and they ask 10, 20, 30, 40 questions just to get to that punchline. So let's see where he's going with this one.
And then after that happened, do you remember what month the money came in, roughly?
In May.
Well, let me slow you down. Once you've done that, when the money comes in, you said Chris Wilson's office is going to be handling that disbursement, correct?
Correct.
What are you expecting to happen next?
I'm expecting copies of the settlement paperwork, copies of the disbursement sheets signed by the client, and I'm expecting 2 fee checks and 2 expense reimbursement checks, because there's 2 cases. It was a case for the deceased and a case for his wife. So I'm expecting 4 checks total.
All right. And you're about to say, and I cut you off, you said something happened in May. Did something happen related to the Ferris case in May.
Yes, I received by mail the settlement package from Chris Wilson's office, but all it contained was a cover letter and the 2 expense reimbursement checks. So I emailed Vicki Lyman, which is Chris Wilson's secretary, and said something like, hey girl, I got these expense checks in. When can I expect the attorney fee checks? And she replied to my email telling me that, excuse me, hey friend, you know, the attorney's got that money at disbursement. And I was really shocked because I didn't even know when the disbursement took place. I was never supplied copies of it or anything.
What's your thought when Vicki says that? What did you think?
So she is a vital witness into admitting evidence from the financial crimes because he has only been indicted on those crimes and hasn't had a trial or anything. And so they're kind of, in a way, trying a whole case within this criminal case. So it's interesting that they're having to do that they are doing that.
Think may have happened.
Well, I called her and I said, you know, you already gave the checks. I was like, I don't think we've received them. And she was like, yeah, they were done at disbursement in March. And so I asked her first to send me over copies of the disbursement sheets and where I could look at those. And then I reached out across to our accounts payable just to make sure that checks somehow bypassed me and went straight to into the client trust to their department. And they told me no, that they didn't have any such checks on the books either. And I was like, okay, so I assumed that they gave Elliot the checks and he's lost them. They're misplaced.
Great question, Jay. What if the jury can't remember everything? And a lot of times jurors don't remember everything. And towards the beginning, the judge gives them an admonition and lets them know, hey, we're giving you paper and a pen. Most times they get paper and a pen where they can write down notes from the entire trial. In shorter ones, it's a little easier. In this one that's been going on already for 2.5 weeks, it's definitely a lot longer. And so hopefully, I don't know how many jurors they have in this case, but normally it's about 12. So between 12 of them, they should be able to piece everything together. They also get to take back all the evidence that has been submitted and admitted into the case. And so, for example, that exhibit that they're looking at, the settlement statement, they'll be able to look at that. So that's a great question, Jay.
Place. They're somewhere in his truck. They're somewhere in a file folder stuck and just kind of hid away and he's forgotten to give them to me.
Did you say that, Becky? Like, come on, why'd you give them to my boss?
Why? I said, why would you do that? I was like, why would you give checks to the attorney? Why wouldn't you send them straight to me where I can get them deposited?
I'm going to put it states 312 that's already in evidence, and this is the page marked bait stamp 2371 for the record up on the screen. Can you see that on your little screen? Do I need to bring that in?
I can see it.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
That is the email I was talking about where I told her I just got the expenses, but where's the fee? And she says it's because your boss and mine and Liz's got their fees once they were signed. Duh.
So the defense should be objecting to hearsay, but they're not.
Did you have a conversation with Alec at this point, or what did you do next?
I did.
So you called the finance in your own firm and said, hey, did we get this check? And they
correct.
said no.
They said no. And so I verified that. And then I asked Vicki, I said, are you positive? And she said, yes. And I was like, okay, I'll go see if he remembers where they're at. So he happened to be in the office by that time. His door was closed. I went in, he was on the phone, and
he says,
I kind of kept checking and going back. Eventually I got to speak to him, and he was still kind of on the phone, but he was like, no, I didn't get those checks. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And I was kind of back and forth. And I'm like, he said he didn't get them. Are you sure? And this kind of went back and forth for a few minutes, and over the course of the rest of the day. And I said, hey, he just told me that Chris was still holding those funds in trust. I was like, I don't understand. You say that they've been cut. I was like, can you send me copies of stuff? Because I don't see anything. And he's telling me their funds are in trust. And she was like, Annette, I know for a fact that the checks are cut. There is no money in trust. And the reason I know that is because when the checks were written to Alec, I knew it was a bit odd because they were written to Richard. They were written out to him personally instead of the firm. And
which checks are usually written out to the firm and not him individually, especially because they usually have to get W-9s for tax purposes to know exactly where the money is going. And so that is a big red flag, not a yellow flag like she was saying earlier. That's a red flag.
And I said,
they were written out to him personally instead of the firm.
Correct.
Why did that stick out in her mind? Why did that stick out in your mind?
So the prosecutor stopped right there and re-said what she just said, nail it home to the jury to add some more emphasis to it.
Because common sense tells me that the attorney fees belong to the firm, where the firm, I don't know, I didn't understand the complete breakdown until Jeannie went over it in her testimony, but I knew by common sense that the funds belong to the firm. And then once they do whatever percentages and everything they need to do, then the attorney gets his portion later. So I knew it wasn't right, that it shouldn't have never gone to an individual attorney. It should go to the firm as a whole.
Nope. It was definitely not right that it'd be personally written out to him. And so we got a good question right here. I wonder if this is scary for her, or a statement. And yes, it can be scary. And I'll hit on something that makes it even more scarier in a minute. But she did seem a little nervous up there. And I would be too, frankly. And she's testifying against her old boss. And so that would be kind of scary and concerning. But one thing that makes it even scarier is that there was a bomb threat at this courthouse today, which is crazy. There was a bomb threat at this courthouse. So the judge actually stopped the entire trial and evacuated everyone from the courthouse. And so the trial was put on hold because of this bomb threat that was called in. And the trial just stopped for a few hours. And then eventually they reconvened at 3:10 their time, I think. And so that adds even more to what you're saying, and it can be definitely scary. But I just want to thank you guys for joining me tonight. If you do have any questions, pop them down there. I actually don't have a whole lot more time, but I hope to jump on here tomorrow night and give a little update on this case. And so if you do have any questions for tomorrow, I'd love to hear them tomorrow as well. And I want to say thank you guys for joining me. Have a good evening.